Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey Pierce, and I'm the Marketing Director here at ChurnZero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled, How to Transform Reviews into Reoccurring Revenue. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording this session, and a link to the recording will be available 24 hours after this webinar. Throughout the presentation, you're welcome to submit your questions via the Questions tab, and our staff will try and answer them as we go. We will also address as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion of this webinar. Now I'm pleased to introduce to you our two presenters for today. We have Andrew Ledet, who is the Director of Customer Success at G2, which is the world's leading B2B software and services review platform. And we also have Bora Lee, who is a Customer Success Team Lead here at ChurnZero, which is a real-time customer success platform to help subscription businesses fight churn. I'm excited to have both Andrew and Bora here to talk to us about the power of customer reviews and buyer intent data that customer success teams can leverage. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Corey, and thank you everyone who's made a little bit of time for us today to talk through this super interesting topic of reviews and their relationship to revenue. One thing as we were preparing this, I was reflecting on just the true power of stories, and that's one of the things we're going to touch on today in the time I've been at G2, to see that rise of reviews as a platform to help businesses. And so when we think about the main focus for today, how do reviews create revenue? There are four elements that this space has helped create. So reviews really function to help drive awareness and trust. And so that component has changed, as we'll make the case for in a couple of slides, of the shift in buyers and what they're doing. And so these reviews then drive more buyers to discover your product, which is that purple piece. And then the reviews, when new companies are researching your product, that then creates new pipeline. We're going to talk through some different strategies and how these reviews can be leveraged to interest more people and then work them faster down your funnel, and ultimately more revenue. So the next slide goes through some interesting data on what prospects and buyers are looking for and who they trust. And so unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, if you are a customer success manager, we have a little larger chunk of trust that we have with our clients. But we see sales and marketing teams here are two of the lower performers on what audience people trust when they're looking for new information about software products. And so how do we combat that? How do we make it easier for our product to be adopted, easier for our product to be included into a company's process? Because very often new products require a new process. And so from here, if we look at the next slide, one of the interesting things is that software buyers read reviews. And so I've been at G2 a little more than 4 years, and in that time, seeing that growth of the review space of how many buyers come to G2 every month, or the review space in general, how much it's blossomed. Where now reviews, if you think about your own buying behavior, how much you look at reviews before you make a purchasing decision. And so here we look at the old way versus the SaaS way. And if you go back and you think, how did we used to buy things? And from there, we think that there was a large upfront investment in hardware. We'd have to have an evaluation process, determine if that tool met our needs. And that investment took a long time before you would see value. You'd also may need to use a services tool or a services partner to help you implement that new hardware. And then there was ongoing maintenance to make sure it worked. If you needed to customize something, that took time and project management. And ultimately, it was complex and expensive. Whereas now we think of the SaaS way for our tools on how are those set up. There's an annual contract, and that then drives where you pay for use. So maybe that's a seat model where your customers have to pay for how many users they have of your tool versus one lump sum fee. Additionally, what is shifted there is instead of a long term to value, it's much faster. And one of the other parts is that we have different teams that have been created, like Bora and my roles, to help customers see value. And then the other part that's different now in the SaaS way is upgrades and enhancements come potentially weekly, where your product teams can roll out new features seamlessly to your users. And all of this makes a change in our ways of life, of how do we interact with companies, which we're going to go through on the next slide. And so tried to litter in some GIFs here from pop culture to make this a little more fun on our webinar or lunchtime viewing today. And so 3 ways that this SaaS way is different. And as we look at big picture of how the review ecosystem is changing how we interact with our customers, that focus now is on the customer. We now have all these different terms that we didn't have before that are key company objectives when you start listening to earnings calls. If we want to focus on the voice of customer, as customer success managers, we look to find and build champions and who are our stakeholders and exec sponsors. And then, like I touched on, Bor and I, we wouldn't have jobs if there wasn't customer success. And so this new function of customer success managers, implementation managers, and then on the client side, potentially you do this for your company, where you build references. How do we build up that voice of customer, those advocates of our tools, so they can help us sell? And that's one of the things we're going to focus on as well today, of how do you turn your customers into your sales team? If our sales and marketing teams aren't that trusted, aren't that go-to source for what people believe about your product, who is? It's your customers. And so one of the other ways that we've grown in this new SaaS model is that we now look at all these new acronyms that we now are so fluent in: Net Promoter Score, Customer Satisfaction or CSAT, Lifetime Value, Cost to Serve, all these different things that we're really trying to put baselines and benchmarks on. Are we doing an effective job to service our client, to ensure that they grow, to ensure that they adopt, to ensure that they renew? And so from there, I started to think through the power of reviews in a little greater detail. And I was reminded a little bit of iceberg, which is our next slide. So you may be thinking too of the iceberg analogy that maybe you heard in college, and not necessarily lettuce, which is my least favorite of iceberg lettuce. I'm more of a romaine mix, as we lunch is on my brain again today. But the next slide is really kind of that psychological iceberg that we think of. And so on the left here, we'll see a couple different pieces on what we see when we gather reviews and the power of third-party sites. So on the surface, very often you'll see that NPS, that star rating, that customer satisfaction score, or perhaps you do this in your own way to scale. But what lies beneath the water are tons more data points. And so at G2, each review has up to 70 different data points. The 1 million+ reviews we have on G2, there's so much data there. And what's really fascinating is if you're looking at how do you serve your clients, really understanding what they like about your product and what they hate about your product. That's where NPS kind of helps us. But then we can go even deeper of what are the features of your product? Does it work well? And then one of the parts that I love so much is swap data. So when someone leaves, quits using your tool, where do they go? Who switched from competitor ABC to use your product? That's all available data that lies underneath the surface within reviews. And then as I thought about this a little bit more, we'll see on the other side of our iceberg, some other functions that truly drive value and turn reviews into revenue. So when we get reviews, on one hand, we see that our customers are giving us feedback, which is super critical to how our product evolves. And so that detail helps us to know, what do they think? Kind of in tandem with that NPS piece on the left. But the other part beneath the surface, when you work with a review platform, third party like G2, is you can potentially then see the prospects that are researching your product, what they're doing. And that's a super valuable piece on how we're driving revenue with companies, is where are your reviews driving activity and driving research? And more, this is a huge growth area for companies as they create that client-first culture. Yeah, we can go ahead to the next one. And so when we're looking to build that client-first culture, back when I managed accounts, before I managed our customer success team, these were all exercises that I went through with our customers of trying to balance how often I wanted to talk to the clients versus how often they wanted to talk to us. And then the other piece of determining how do they want to communicate. And so all of this then stems back to that SaaS change, the software as a service shift, where then we're looking to partner with our customers to best understand how are they experiencing our product, our services, so we can best help them grow and ultimately renew. And so from there, we want to make sure that we have a constant tether to what our clients are thinking and experiencing with our product, which Bor is going to go into in greater detail in a couple minutes. But as we start to build this client-first culture, we start looking at what's the desired sequence. And so we wanted to make sure that we gave some action items on how that could look. So if we go to the next slide, Corey. This lovely GIF. So those who have worked closely with me know that I have a love for GIFs and different presentations. But this guy coming through the computer, how are we getting feedback from our clients? And very often this is how it looks, and Bora is going to go into greater detail beyond these 4 points. But very often it starts with that Net Promoter Score. How are we getting feedback? How are we surveying our customers? And then from there, based on their feedback, we often connect those reviewers, those customers, with a third-party platform like G2 to share that sentiment in greater detail. So if we think back to that iceberg analogy, we don't want to just know how satisfied they are. We want to know a level deeper. What are they satisfied with? What could use some improvement? And then from there, perhaps based on that feedback that is now driving new buyers to learn more specifically about a user experience with your product, then we can reach out as customer success managers to that user to better understand, to better discover what their experience is through that public feedback. And then potentially, if they're willing, we can connect them with our product team for further enhancements so we can best suit not only their needs, but the needs of others like them in the future. And then next slide, Corey. So this is a little bit of a recap on how do we turn those reviews into that green stuff, into revenue. And so I think some of this is our core values as customer success managers. We know that prospects and customers read our reviews. G2 is my personal example. Our traffic continues to grow as more reviews are left on the site. Our traffic continues to grow, where more than 5 million people per month are coming to read reviews of products, compare products. We also know that happy customers grow. Anyone who's looked at customer satisfaction surveys, we know the happy customers will expand. And then there are other ways that we can leverage their voice through case studies, through references, potentially videos are part of your playbook. And we know conversely, unhappy customers, they don't grow as much. They're likely to churn. And so from there, how do we get ahead of that feedback to understand what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, so we can potentially change it? If there's something that's clunky in our tools, how do we fix it? How do we connect them with our support teams to improve that tool? And then on the other side, with those happy customers, how do we build that base of champions, which Bora is going to talk to a bit more on how you scale that process. So ultimately, when you have that group of champions or advocates, you can leverage them to be a sales arm to help bring in new prospects. So if someone is in a particular vertical, you can connect them. Let's say they're in retail and they're not sure if your tool fits their use case. Well, hey, let me connect you with 3 of our customers in that space. When you have reviews on a third-party site, you can slice and dice those reviews to help guide customers to connect with others, really building a community, which is such a huge focus for customer success. And finally, this part, promoting the content that highlights what your users say, not what you say. This circles back to that early slide. If sales and marketing aren't trusted, who is? Your users. And so we think about our own personal consumer behavior, reading reviews from other users who experienced the product. We want to do the same thing in the B2B world, connect prospects with customers. That can be on the low end of lift with quotes and reviews, super easy, and then can ramp up where we're using badges and trophies, building custom reports that showcase our product versus a competing product. So then we're equipping our potential customers with data from our current customers so they can see what they can expect. How long will it take them to see value? So many different pieces. And so that's a high level overview of G2's role, how we're helping turn those reviews into revenue. Bora is now going to walk through in specific what is ChurnZero doing, how do they scale it, and then we have some action items at the end on how you can take away from today.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. So here at TrendZero, I just want to describe a little bit about how we put that theory into practice. So our theory here is we want to generate reviews. We go through a kind of process where we survey our customers, identify customer advocates, get those advocates to leave reviews, which then in turn kind of starts that process all over again, hopefully opening up an avenue for our customers to advocate on our behalf about how much they have found success with our product. So at ChurnZero, the first things first, right? We have to build that trust. So we bring a new customer on board, we identify what matters to them and kind of get them through their first round of successes. And so in doing that, we've defined a process that works for us. Once we've got them onboarded, our customers hit specific points in their customer lifecycle. So those specific points that we have identified are at the end of the implementation, so they've onboarded and they've had that first round of documented success, or kind of a rolling NPS. So for our customers who've been with us, we want to make sure that we have that continuous loop, that tether that keeps us in the know with what our customers think or feel about our product and our services. So we have those 2 points in our customer lifecycle, and that's where we send out an NPS survey. So that NPS survey simply says, how likely are you to refer, us to a friend or a colleague? And based off of that response, we are able to assess a couple of things. One, it provides an additional feedback loop. So if they are not happy and they provide us with some feedback on that, we can do the direct outreach that Andrew mentioned. But we can also then take the next step. If they are a promoter, if they have provided us specific feedback, we are able to automatically generate a follow-up email that thanks them for that feedback and then also encourages them to share that on a third-party review site like G2. So then we have that first ask. The timing is right. They've told us directly that they are happy with what they have experienced, what they've seen and how they use the product, and we've kind of triggered them into that advocacy workflow. So that workflow and that ask is a combination of in-app messages for us as well as emails to ask the customer to write a review, right? Share their experience. And once that customer has gone in and written a review, they get marked within our system as having provided a review and go into a pool of customer advocates. So not only is the data that we get in the NPS survey and the review important, but having that data from the sales process all the way through to maintaining and making sure that our advocates remain happy is something that is really critical to us. So at every point, we want to log and document that information and just ensure that our advocates remain our advocates and that we can continue to grow that pool. At the end, really, these advocates combined with other criteria that we have available to us, like industry, tier, use cases, specific successes with features, allows ChurnZero to really be able to quickly identify those advocates and really allow us to become connectors of our customers. So again, we want to highlight their customer successes. It's our customers that are succeeding. Case studies, sharing their experiences at virtual conferences or VRIGs, which is our kind of industry or specific subcategory tiered groups where our customers can meet and learn about different use cases, participate in conferences. All of these things kind of close that loop and then we start again. What we see from that process is that we're able to quickly have a defined process that we can outline, that we can identify our customer advocates and those that are not as happy as our advocates. We can take that, we can monitor that, measure that, and then we can automate that, and we continue to do that. So some feedback loops outside of that particular process that I wanted to mention here are that we utilize our tech stack. So we've got alerts when, for example, customers are reviewing competitors on sites like G2, or even particularly when an ex-customer is looking at our page. So that's kind of the impetus for a win-back campaign. We can use data from our sales handoff calls. Were they looking at competitors? Who were they looking at? What products specifically or features were they most interested in? We can also look at reviews that were inputted by our customers or former customers and be able to identify different places in our product and then the feedback where our customers may provide us an avenue to improve and always iterate on our processes as well. So I think there's lots of different ways in practice that we can utilize that, but that's kind of the outline of how we have turned that theory into practice. So now we're going to actually take the next step and kind of think about this from a putting it in practice perspective. So with customer advocacy, what we really see are a couple of things in customer success, right? So we're talking about providing that experience for the customer, making sure that your customer finds that continued proactive value, identifying a good time to make that ask. What is your ask? Is it a case study? Is it simply a review? Is it, highlighting them in a webinar? Is it a specific use case? And then following a standard and scalable process, right? We all can can cobble together a process that identifies some of our advocates and get them to essentially write a review. But how do we do that in a way that makes sense, in a way that is scalable and allows us to very easily get to that group of customers? And then lastly, let the customer shine, right? All of that, all of our customer advocacy is really about shining a light on our customers' successes and the value that they're getting. So let me break it down a little bit into some practical considerations. And I've broken it down into these four. There are many, many more that you could kind of sub processes that you can add in here. But the first step is defining that process, right? Really being able to look at that. Then you identify your customer advocates. And again, they're offshoots of this. You want to identify those customers that you want to nurture. You want to identify those customers who are unhappy. The next thing is really making the ask at the right time. The customer just gets out of implementation. They're having very poor success, and then you make the ask, probably not the right time. So thinking about when makes sense, knowing your processes, knowing your customers' behaviors, and being able to understand when that best moment is going to be critical. And then last, it's really about automating that and taking action on any results and feedback that you've gotten. So let's break this down just a little bit further into the specifics. So the first thing here is defining your process. So you have so many things that you think about when you are creating a process. You probably have a loose idea if you don't have anything documented. And for this particular process, there are lots of different avenues that coincide into this ultimate goal. So let's think, what is your objective? What kind of advocates are you trying to nurture? Are you documenting things? How are you monitoring and improving? What is your tech stack that allows for you to manage that process, right? So we'll start with the objective. I think objective is pretty broad and can be fairly narrow here, excuse me. Is it just to get reviews? Just get any reviews you can on a site? Is it to find happy customers? Is it to get customers to a certain point where we only, request reviews on certain features or in certain industries? So know what you're looking for and what this process is designed to help you with. Then what information needs to be passed within the company? I think a big gap can often be that handoff between sales and CS. So what kind of information can we garner there without having to go to the customer, without having to make a single ask? What are those data points that are available to us? We have many, many things, right? Our sales teams are fantastic in learning what the customer's objectives are, potentially if they're looking at any other competitors. We know a lot about their processes. All of these things are things that we can look at. Other places that you can leverage your tech stack, right, would be buyer intent. Again, bringing in a third-party review system. Have they been reviewing other customers? Have they been competitors? Have they been comparing competitors against what you can do? Are there any specific areas that they've been looking at? And really making sure to protect your customer base, right? So if they are interested in competitors, you should educate yourself. The reviews are there and available for everybody, and that's another place we can find that data. The other pieces that I think are really important here are really about documenting success and just making sure that we have a baseline to start from, and then measuring that change and continuing to improve. So it's really going to be about the ability to manage that process, to be able to iterate on the process. And it's not going to be perfect from the start, but it's going to be something that we can work on and get better at. And that's where those feedback loops are incredibly important. Next, it's all about identifying, right? It doesn't matter if we have a process if we do not identify who our customer advocates are. So how, again, do we look at this information? How do we identify these customers? And a lot of that piece is going to be some of the stuff that we have already. Again, competitors that were being evaluated, knowing and talking, and most importantly, actively listening to what the customer has to say. If the customer is unhappy, where are they unhappy? How can we remedy that? Is it a product fit? Is it just an expectations thing? How can we support that process? And really, how do we segment the information that we have at hand. At ChurnZero, we're really, really lucky to be able to use our own tool to be able to manage our customers. And within that tool, we have the ability to take any data point in the system really that we have and segment our customer base. So I can say, give me all customers who are up for renewal in the next 90 days who have given us a poor NPS and never written us a review. So all of a sudden, I can hone in on specific groups of my customers that I need to nurture, customers that are unhappy with X, Y, or Z feature, or unhappy in terms of expectations, or perhaps proactively we can remedy some of the timeline issues and things like that. And I can really find customer advocates for specific groups. So in identifying not only my customer advocates, but adding in all of the other data points, I'm able to systematically build out, for lack of a better term, a library, right? A grouping, a place where I can go to identify advocates and share that information freely across our company. So everybody knows the types of use cases that have been successful. Everybody knows that certain industry use cases are really useful, that customers have succeeded in certain things, and that they really like certain features. The next step here is really looking at and spotting the signs. So we have different signs of our customer advocates and of our customers who are a little bit unhappy. So I mentioned a couple of these, but definitely if they found value in your product and they're vocal about it, if they have documented wins, if they've provided positive feedback. Other things are if they have, purchased an add-on or upgraded with you, right? These are signs of a healthy, happy, and thriving customer. Other signs that might be less happy are things like the customer is off of their expected timeline. That's a hard one, right? There's always been a competitor lurking in the background. So maybe you're running a pilot, or they have a couple months left on a certain contract, these types of things. And then really most importantly is that multi-level buy-in. You don't have everybody on board with what your product or your application can do, and that value hasn't been seen, right? So it's all about the customer again, the voice of the customer, and being able to identify that as quickly as possible. Now, once we've done our defining of the process and we've identified our customers and been able to take a couple of looks at spotting our happy and unhappy customers, we really want to think about what we're asking the customer to do, who the ask comes from, and really that timing, right? Where is the customer in that process with you? So a couple of things that I like to highlight here. The ask. So who does this come from? So like G2, right? A third party sometimes is the best way to make an ask. Somebody who is not part of your system. Maybe the customer feels they can give a more anonymous or a more unbiased response. Often here we at ChurnZero, the NPS survey, that initial kind of barometer for satisfaction will come from the CSM. I like to think, of course, that our customers are pretty honest and open and frank with us, and we love that. We love feedback and to be able to improve and get better. But you also have kind of the different parts of that process and considerations to make based off of what your business is. And then the timing of the ask. I read a book a while back that is just talking about getting the customer to say yes to small things. So are you able to do X? Yes. Are we able to do Y? Yes. And having small asks like that, starting with perhaps filling out, simply clicking a scale of 0 to 10, like an NPS, allows us to kind of prep the customer for a slightly bigger ask. And since we already know that they are kind of positive about our product, that ask, even though it's bigger, is a little bit easier to answer, right? So that's a really big part of it. I think with that ask, the other thing I want to say is, if you don't ask, you won't know, right? All the worst that can happen is the customer says no to reviewing your product. As long as we know that the customer has expressed satisfaction before, has documented successes, all of these things, it's likely, and there's going to be some numbers in just a second, that do prove that customers are willing to leave a review if you ask them to. Now let's look a little bit at the numbers because I think this is interesting, right? This is how we start to be able to generate revenue and really increase what we have. So in customer success, generating revenue or turning reviews into revenue is really happy customer equals more revenue, right? Happy customers are successful, they've achieved things, they've seen ROI, they've seen decreases in their own time spent, they've seen decreases in their own churn, they've seen increases in the amount of expansion. So when we think about this, I pulled these three particular metrics. So for every 1-star increase that a business gets on Yelp, they see a 5 to 9% increase in revenue. 5 to 9%, okay? So that right there should tell you that reviews matter, right? People who are looking at reviews, people who are reading reviews and responses matter. Customers spend 31% more when a business has a positive review or has positive reviews. So again, nurturing our advocates and getting them to the ask point and having them actually execute on that ask is important. And then 68% of consumers have left a review for a local business after being asked to do so. So that's a very, very high number. Say, if we round up, 7 out of every 10 folks who have been asked to leave a review do, right? And this is just kind of some numbers that come from, places that are outlined here, but I do think that tells you something, right? Revenue, reviews they impact each other, especially now in the SaaS business where a customer can just walk away if they're unhappy. So our goal is to generate successes for those customers and make sure that that's reflected and continue that process. So now that we know about the numbers, we know about making the ask, the last piece here is just really going to be to think about how to automate and how to take action. So I think this is the hardest part of an entire process. So we've broken down the process, we've made all the asks, we've done everything there. But now how do we ensure that we take continuous action? So what happens now? You've made the ask, they've done the review. Is that where it ends? Once they're an advocate, do we stop looking after them? Do we stop nurturing them? I think not, right? That process is going to be one that continues to go and to go. And as their experience grows with you, as their successes grow with you, you'll see that maintaining a nice large pool of advocates is only to your advantage, right? That's a happy customer who won't churn. So automating the process, I like to talk about this a lot because a lot of CS teams I know and a lot of CS teams that I work with tend to start very manual. Who's on board with we have everything in a spreadsheet and we eventually update everything and it sometimes doesn't get updated, but it does at the end. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So how do we take that manual bit out of the process and how do we think about leveraging automation, the tech stack that we have? Do you have a CRM? Do you have a tool that manages your CS? Do you have a tool that is like G2 that manages your reviews, that process? What can we do? And how do we build that into your tech stack? So really, it's about the trigger for the process. So we've now got our customer to be an advocate. That is our trigger. And how do we continue that, right? If we have that process and we have a customer advocate, you're probably going to start a second process, maintaining our advocacy, right? So this process here is going to work. It's going to lead into this process here, which is going to be to maintain that customer base. So a couple of things I want to reiterate here. Happy customers will not leave you. So by having that base, we are stabilizing our current revenue. We're stabilizing the success of our current customers, but you don't want to leave it there. So you want to make sure that you are continuously talking and gathering feedback from your customers. So that's where that rolling NPS might potentially fit in. If you are thinking about that rolling data and that continuous data, we're also talking about the fact that we want to keep fresh data, right? So we always want to continuously have new successes, have new case studies, have new information and feedback from our customers. That allows you to be a trusted advisor to the customer. That allows them to value your word. So unlike Andrew's first or second slide there, that says sales and marketing, nobody trusts, right? Customer success is a little bit luckier, right? We have the ear of the customer and they continue to value you more as you bring that customer value. And then the last piece there in terms of automating that is leveraging the platform. So if we think about the different pieces there, we have the consistent asks, we have the feedback loops, we have all of those pieces is going to be the data. The data allows us to continuously improve. Did we get these pieces? Are we missing data from this customer? How can we garner that data without asking the customer? What information do we already have in the system? And that completes that loop. Okay, so now we have all of the different pieces there that we're able to show you, that are able to make up the different parts of that process to allow for you to have that ask. So I think that will take us here to kind of some of the key takeaways that we want to discuss today. Andrew?
Sure, and thanks for walking through how you attack and built that process. I think many of us probably can relate to that manual piece at some point, whether it's an Excel file, a Google Sheet, something where we all start somewhere. And now there are so many tools out that help us get better. And appreciate you sharing ChurnZero, how you're doing it. And so I think some of those big takeaways from what Bora shared and what I shared, thinking through who truly is the focus, and it's the customers. That is the central theme to our roles, to our success as businesses. If we think otherwise, that we have the most amazing tool in all the world, but if you don't have customers, it's not doing its intended purpose. And so from there, I think we then expand, how do we make sure that we get that feedback, like Bora walked through so clearly, early signs of happy or unhappy customers. If we put all of our chips into the basket that our tool or our product is amazing, but we don't get any data back, or we don't have any communication with our clients through automated or anonymous feedback, then we're not really doing as best we could to ensure that our customers are satisfied with our tool or blown away. We don't want them just satisfied. We want them to be shouting about how great it is on review platforms like G2, so that inspires new customers to come to you. And then the final two, I guess Bora touched on this too. So retention and growth, they really focus on those reviews. So getting that feedback early internally, but then making sure that you have a concerted effort. How do you showcase those reviews of your customers publicly in a third-party trusted platform where their reviews are validated? And one of the other big pieces that we didn't touch on today, there have been other webinars that G2 has led, of how do we openly receive that feedback, that we're not just going after just the happiest of happy customers, and we only have 10 happy customers in all the world, but they're immensely happy. You do need that reality check that your tool won't work for everyone. Maybe it works better for certain company sizes or verticals. That's where the more reviews you get, and that comes back to Bora's strategy or advice of what is your strategy? Is it a numbers play? Hey, we want to get 100 reviews this quarter, this month. Okay, great. Then you have to open yourself that you may have people that do not like your tool, that doesn't work as well for them. That's an opportunity. It's not something to shy away from. So I encourage you to find other materials there or reach out to us. Happy to share more documentation on the power of negative reviews too. So often we think just the champions are the main focus. And then that last part, take action. All of this in theory, we want to put it to practice, which is the next slide on what can we do now? So you've been with us for about 40 minutes. What do we do after we leave this? So Bora, if you could walk through some of the ideas that we came up with to implement now.
Yes. So these are the slides I love from webinars, ideas that I can take away. So the first big thing is if you haven't segmented your customers into those who are potential advocates and those you need to nurture, I would do so now, right? This is a really good opportunity to look at your customer base and assess, do we have advocates right now? Do we need to nurture our customers? Do we have customers who are unhappy? How do we push all those in the right direction in order to make them speak for us and make allow us to understand and better serve our customers? The other thing there is create an alert. So if you have any type of way to notify your CSM when customers provide feedback or when customers research a competitor, right? Again, going back to that tech stack, that's going to be critical. Can your CSMs be as proactive as possible, right? Feedback by nature is a reactive thing, but if they provide feedback, can we be proactive about reaching out, getting more information, and understanding where the root of that feedback comes from? And then lastly, really talking about aligning the voice of the customer for the strategic areas of growth, right? So different areas, how do we think through voice of the customer? How do we make the customer be the shining factor and beacon across all of our different strategic areas? So I think those are some, hopefully, just takeaways that you can implement today, start to think about and start to consider.
Corey, looks like we have a couple good questions in there that I was reading through a little bit, so I'm not sure where we should start with those.
Yes, thank you so much for that presentation. We do have some questions that have come in, and let me see. Let me pull them up and we can get going on the questions. So our first question is, can you expand on what you're using to track potential customers going to a competitor's reviews? Is that an API or something your engineering team set up? That might be a good question for you, Andrew.
Sure. It's somewhat similar to one of the other questions we have too. So in looking at that with different customers, there are different options. So like Bora was mentioning, understanding the tech stack, what tools do you use? In particular, the quickest answer to your question is through G2, we're able to share identifiable companies that are researching your product or comparing your product. So then when we start to see those companies, so ABC Corp looked at your product, they ran a comparison against your product and another, we can alert you of what that activity was, when it happened, as well as the rest of that journey. So that's a function of what G2 offers. From there are different ways where we best want to understand, what do you use? Where does your team live? Where would you want that alert to live? And it's easiest and not the most scalable, but fastest to implement. We can set up an alert system. So every day you tell us which companies you're most focused on. So that can be your customers. It can be a segment of your customers. It can be prospects. That's how we help sales teams. Then we can push an alert to you whenever that company shows up on G2 and what they did. And so from there, the customer success use case would be, let's load it up with however many customers you have, and then set up a daily or weekly alert to you or the customer success manager. Here are my 30 accounts. Did any of them show up this week on G2 to compare my product with a competitor? And so from there are different ways that we can integrate that data, that alert, whether that's your CRM or wherever your CSMs live. There are different ways that we can connect those dots. The easiest and fastest way is just an email alert. And depending on the scale of how many companies your CSMs manage or you manage, that scales differently. If we're looking to roll out to an entire team, then we look to more of those API pushes and how we connect one tool to another.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I know our sales team and CS team leverage those buyer intent stats, so it's great stuff. We have another question that came in. So CSAT, so the customer satisfaction, and NPS, the Net Promoter Score, were both mentioned as surveys. Any advice on the differences of those two, or when maybe you should use one versus the other?
Bora, do you want to take that one a little
Sure,
bit?
I'm happy to take that one. So what we most commonly see, or in my case, like what we've most commonly experienced, is that NPS, the Net Promoter Score, it tends to be the most standardized. So they have the Net Promoter Score is one question. It's how likely are you to refer X, your brand, product, service, to a friend or a colleague, and that is on a 0 to 10 scale. So that allows us to standardize that question across the board to all of our customers. The question can't be changed by its nature. So that's kind of a really, really good baseline when we're comparing one customer's response to another. CSAT is specifically around customer satisfaction. I see this used most with tickets. So if you have support tickets in particular, were you satisfied with our interaction? How satisfied were you with the interaction that you had with the customer or with our team? And I think that tends to be a little bit more open-ended. You can change up the ratings and you can kind of change what the rating text is and things like that. You may have seen this when you've submitted a support ticket and has been closed. So how satisfied were you with the resolution of this ticket? Good, bad, I'm satisfied, I'm not satisfied. So I think in my experience, I prefer NPS, but again, it all goes back to it doesn't matter what method you use to try to incite feedback. It matters about if you take action on that insight. So depending on what your ask and your objective is, CSAT may be more preferable than NPS or vice versa. But there's different ways that you can really measure a lot of your customer feedback.
I think the
Awesome.
other part I'd add on real quick, I think it's consistency. I know early on, my time at G2, when we were just starting out, we were figuring out our way and
Fair.
we just bulk send a bunch of emails and then maybe we forgot about it and we didn't do it again for a while. To now what Bora laid out, there's a strategy, there's a system in place. These things are triggered automatically based on certain events happening or not happening. So that's where I think there are some other questions I saw too of like, how do you figure that out?
Yeah.
And so I think as Bora unpacked there, it really depends on your product. How long does it take to implement? How long does it take for a customer to see value? Do you have a customer journey in mind of by this date they should have done this? And so that one slide that Bora had of certain milestones, how do you think through that for your product? That's probably another piece that's worth exploring as we unfurl this big world of customer success and feedback. Where are those milestone markers along that year if it's an annual contract that is probably the most standard in SaaS land? Where do you want someone to be in 30 days, 60, 90? And then from there, those different markers, I think we all tend to think of renewal season as that final quarter where we start, hey, did we achieve everything we wanted to this year? That's way too late in most cases. So what Bora shared and what I shared here is you got to start from day minus 30. You want to build that feedback culture before they even become a customer through that review strategy. So you have reviews powering new prospects coming on board. So I think that's where I would tend to advise some people if you're starting out on that strategy. When should I trigger these? What's the difference between CSAT and NPS? I've read up some of it too, and I'm not really clear on the difference between NPS and CSAT. It's still a survey, but are you consistent with it? And then Bora's thing, what do you do with it? Do you just leave it on the shelf or do you take action? Do you change your process or your product? Do you share that feedback with your product team? Hey, we're getting a ton of feedback that whatever is clunky, it doesn't work. So that's really leveraging, again, that voice of customer in so many ways through a simple ask of, would you recommend us or how satisfied are you?
Absolutely. Thanks for that clarification. Our next question is on the automation piece, and the question is, could you share a little bit more on how you do this? What are the components you typically leverage to trigger an ask? Is it NPS, a QBR, or something else?
Yeah, so I think Andrew touched on a couple of pieces, but for our automation, we actually automate based off of a lot of different things. ChurnZero is really lucky in the fact that we are able to pipe in not only CRM data, support ticket data, financial data, usage data in our product. So some of the major points in our ask are after a successful implementation. So really we want to assess how well our implementation went. We do an ask 5 months from renewal because again, 90 days out, 60 days out, 30 days out from a renewal is not enough time to talk to the customer, to understand where dissatisfaction has happened, where we might have missed a step, and then to remedy that. Those are two very specific points. And then we also have just rolling follow-ups. When we're talking about the automation piece, we also have consistent automation across the board, not just in reference, to NPS and reviews, but actually based off of how we expect our customers to behave in our product. So again, at the 30-day mark of our product, I might not expect the customer to yet be in and actively using our product. So I'm not going to trigger an automation based off of usage at that point. But once I have a customer that has been fully implemented and they are expected to be live and adopting at a certain rate, for example, I might split this out again into my key accounts versus my corporate accounts. My corporate accounts, I might expect that volume at a specific rate that is a little bit lower than my key accounts, but I'm tracking that and I'm actually generating automated not asks, right? Not surveys, but I'm saying, hey, customer, did you know this is kind of the benchmark for customers in your industry and of your size, and here is where you mark up against them. Let's talk about this. Let's learn a little bit more about how we can assess these areas where you might be able to do a little bit better and these areas where you're doing really, really well. And I think that is a different process than asking for a review, but all of that equals out to the ask that you would make, right? And maybe at the end of that project, sure, you can make, you could do an NPS. I think personally that might be a biased NPS, right? So we like to keep them as unbiased as possible. But could you make an ask? Hey, did you have a really good experience? Would you like to, to write a review for us? Certainly. But again, back to what Andrew said, I also want to understand when customers are not doing well, when they're running into things, and we don't, by any means just cherry pick only good positive reviews, right? That doesn't help anyone. It doesn't provide any real feedback loop there. So I think those asks, depending on how well you know your product and your customer, should be at those milestone points in the journey.
And think too quickly of customers that aren't a good fit.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get business just for the sake of growing. We're all very much in hyper growth companies where, yep, let's sell more, grow more. But then if you start having churn, we want churn to be zero, where you have happy customers and they stay with you and they grow. You want to make sure through getting that feedback from customers where maybe for whatever reason your tool isn't meant to work for an enterprise company. It's not there yet. So you may not have onboarded enterprise companies and you may want to shy away from that for right now. Maybe down the line as your tool grows, maybe, or small business or whatever it might be, or a certain vertical or geographic area. Maybe you don't have that support yet. And so from there, that's where so much of being a skilled advisor comes back to, is this a good fit for you? Is this something that will grow with you? And knowing to share that voice of customer unbiased on a third party, ideally, but you still can share those as that company of sharing that voice to prospects, saying like, hey, these aren't from me, these are on a third party platform. Go have a look on what our users say about us. Totally transparent and helps prospects ultimately decide for themselves, which is what they're going to do. Think of so much of our buying cycle. We don't push too much now. Customers come to us. We try and nurture in different ways through alerts and knowing when people are actively researching or in market or looking to switch. But for the most part, our own buying behavior is the perfect model. How often are we sold to versus we go do the research ourselves? That's what our buyers are doing.
Absolutely. So our next question starts off by saying that it was interesting, Andrew, that clients don't trust sales and marketing. And the question was, how do we go about changing that? Would you recommend CSMs to be a part of the entire cycle? In other words, sales, activation, handover, etc.
Yeah, I love it. And this is one of those core questions as customer success grows. Is it a sales function? Is it a separate function? Is it a support function? And it varies by company. I think from my perspective, I've seen it shift over time at G2 from my time there. Increasingly, we view it as a partnership. And I see CS increasingly now, our function is how do we build that project, establish those milestones, make sure, like Boris said, that we know what the objectives are for someone using our product and our platform. So from there, that's where it's super helpful because I think we can all acknowledge we all have different skills. Some of us are better at certain things than others. And so from there, one of the biggest strengths I think that customer success managers bring to the party is that ability to listen, to discover, to empathize, and to build a plan. And so the better we're able to do that in partnership, that could be where we operate separately, like Bora was saying, that handoff. Maybe our sales reps are people that are going and finding new business. They gather all that information. And then at some point, we need to come together and transfer that knowledge. Perhaps there's overlap there. Maybe a CSM is involved toward the very end of a sales cycle. This prospect is very close to pulling the trigger. We'd love for you to join to help build a project plan with them. That's a great opportunity. So now it's a warm introduction. We're nurturing the customer before they've even signed with us. So a good faith gesture. And so from there, that's how I think we're looking at it as a company. I imagine TrendZero is somewhat similar.
Yeah, I think that's it's an interesting topic, right? The division of how CS works, not only in the sales handoff in that process, but also in renewals, like who owns that process. So there are a lot of different ways. I don't know if there's any one single way that's right, but it is, I think, like Andrew said, do you inject a CSM, kind of a different voice that is not the sales and marketing person, into some part of the sales process towards the end, very likely, that can answer some specific questions, who can reach out and really talk about use cases and things they've seen with other customers be super successful. Do we have that library of information that allows even our sales and our marketing team to become more trusted? Did you know, have you seen this use case where our customers have been able to successfully do this, or CSMs and have worked with our customers and partnered together to do that? Those case studies, the voice that the customer actually gives the sales team, and those stories that arise from that, I think, are what starts to trend our sales team to be more legitimate, right? For lack of better words, right? We're putting, not, again, our sales teams not just saying something, but they're backing it up with actions and words by people that are not part of the company that is trying to sell to them.
I think
Absolutely.
too of the other part of like who's at the center. It's the customer. Like very often we get in the way of like, well, is it a sales thing? Is it a CS thing? Ask yourself, is it a customer thing? I think how that shifts that dialogue.
I love that. So moving one step kind of past the reviews, we have a question that says, what is the right time to leverage champions for customer referrals? Is that right after they leave a review or another time in the life cycle?
That is an interesting question. And I think it kind of goes back. We actually have folks who might have signed up for a referral program, or, done something like that without even leaving a review. I think we actually have two tracks here where we have the ability to, provide a customer referral program where they join, and, they might be asked to speak with prospects or other customers about use cases. And then we have kind of a different track that actually leads to reviews. I think, from our perspective, the ask is all about kind of what your objective is. For your objective might be growing reviews. Again, back to Andrew's example, we need 100 reviews by the end of this quarter. Well, we're going to focus that ask in leveraging champions to write those reviews for us. Your ask might be actually that we need case studies, or we need to be able to have hosts for our VRIGs, right, our conferences, that generate use cases and bring together and net together a community. Maybe that's the right time to ask. I think right after they leave a review, again, is a fantastic time to ask if you are not doing anything, right? So they've just completed the ask that you've made them, and then you have another ask. If it's simply, hey, thank you so much for that, we have a fantastic referral program here that I think would fit your needs, feel free to join here. That is something that I think makes sense, and something that we do as well, depending on, again, what the original ask was. I just like to think of it as, building credit. And I think there's conversations about building up emotional credit and building up like well-being credit with your customers. So they do something for you that depletes our credit a little bit. You do something for them that increases that a little bit. And that's kind of, where a lot of people think. So I think a customer referral program can be a fantastic way to give a little bit back to that customer, and really that customer can, benefit from those types of things as well.
An interesting part too, so one of the elements of the G2 review form at the very end, it asks if someone wants to be a reference. And so in working with G2, you can then see, all right, here are 20% of our reviewers raised their hand and said, yes, I want to be a reference. That helps guide you on what is their intent. The other thing I'll add quickly is some of the companies that I've worked with in the past at G2, that reference piece, depending how complicated your tool is, like, do you really need to potentially slow down a deal to connect someone one-to-one? The very fascinating thing, there are some case studies on this. Companies used a reference page or a third-party site like G2 to direct someone when they said, I want a reference. One of the tools that we offer customers is a reference page where you pick, maybe it's by vertical or company size. Here are 50 reviews from people in finance. You're in finance, here are reviews from people like you. That supremely shrank the sales cycle timeline because you now didn't have to coordinate schedules. So that's another way to think through, like what Bora was laying out. How do you automate? How do you scale? If buyers are going to do their research anyway, help guide them towards people like them through that library of customer voice.
Awesome. Well, since we're at the top of the hour now, I want to thank you both for joining us and providing us all this information on how to leverage reviews and, also tie it back to revenue, which I think is important for all of our customer-facing teams. At this time, I'd like to thank you for joining us. And at the end of this webinar, a survey will pop up as we're all about customer feedback. And we'd love to hear what you think about the webinar and the content we had today. And just a reminder, we will be sending out a email tomorrow with a link to the recording. So thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Andrew and thanks Bora.
Thanks so much.
Bye.